I think we're seeing more progress than is apparent because we're not getting triggered by the updates. I mean, it used to be that the update, that was the thing that you looked for. Not that they couldn't do this stuff. They've always been able to do it. But that was when we, as a community watching this stuff happen, that's when we would get triggered, to look for new stuff. But now I feel like it more than before, you're having to pay attention to the in-betweens to see the improvements also. Yeah, the car can, everything you can see, the car can see. There's nothing that you sitting in the driver, and the car can see tons of other things too. It sees in all the directions at the same time. Well, anyway, like all that stuff is gone. Like even trucks merging from like looping ramps, where the context is complicated and judging the speed is really complicated. Like figuring the car's gotten good at seeing that happening and getting out of the way at about the same time you as a human would, right? And the result of that is that unlike earlier versions, which performed well in terms of the number of critical interventions, there are many, many, many fewer situations where you as the human are sitting there wondering if it's going to do the right thing, having to keep an eye on it. It just doesn't do that anymore. So, in going from Austin to LA, it was like nothing, I some weird thing. Like I drove through these really terrible rainstorms on part of that coming into California, like dark, driving pretty fast, a lot of spray from trucks. The car was just fine with it. And I was comfortable letting the car do it because it was maintaining a good distance. And, once again, not perfect. I'm sure there are people who will be watching this video saying, oh, I was doing that and it didn't work as well for me. And, that's still going to happen. But when I look at the amount of time I spend in the car where I feel like it's worth my energy to pay attention to what's going on because something might go wrong. It's so close to zero now that it kind of doesn't matter anymore. And I feel like for that use case, it's here. Surface streets are still hard. There's other stuff, but the progress has been just amazing to me.
Especially over the last 12 months. It's been absolutely, just insane how much better it's gotten.
This is 4 months. This is, we're in dog years now.
Yeah.
Right? Yes. Like it seems like so long, but like I've only had V13 on my car for like 3 months now. And I've only been able to drive these other things. I just happen to have driven a lot of miles in the last thing, but like the last 2 months, the progress has been amazing, right? And we're not even getting that many versions. It's like we're seeing a lot of that. Tesla can tweak the features that the fleet is using after a version goes out. So we see that occasionally. You see like they'll turn off a feature that they had, or they'll turn on a feature. I think recently, Whole Mars was commenting. I haven't seen this myself, but apparently Tesla flipped a switch and it changed the way the cars, like I never use the car to park. Like he likes to do the thing where, you drive to a destination, then you let the car park in the parking lot or whatnot. I never have the patience for that. I get to the parking lot and I just park it myself. But apparently like there's a qualitative difference that suddenly occurred, not just in his car, but in apparently other, acquaintances' cars also, where the car's behavior in parking lots it changed at one point suddenly. And Tesla had basically flipped a switch where they changed the behavior. So they can do that. I think you see them push, they push a build out, they turn on, turn off features, or they set more, they'll change the threshold on features like 10% of this or 50% of that or whatever the deal is. And we will see the cars become more aggressive in some situations, less aggressive in other situations, refuse to do certain kinds of maneuvers that they were doing last week or last month or whatnot. And so we get to see, they push out a build. The build has a pretty large envelope of capabilities. But when you first push it out to the fleet, you dial it back. And then as they see it performing in the fleet, they can gradually open up the envelope of things it can do. And you will see some things contract. You'll see they'll be seeing that there's some maneuvers or some situations where it's not behaving as well as they would like it to, and they dial down the behavior in that. And you see all this stuff evolve, even in between builds now. And so if you're not really paying close attention, because it used to be when you get a new software build, you're like, oh, now I'll look for all the new things that change. But now you have to be watching all the time because it'll just, you'll get in the car and go driving someplace and it'll do something that it wasn't doing last week. And anyway, so I think we're seeing more progress than is apparent because we're not getting triggered by the updates for, I mean, it used to be that the update, that was the thing that you looked for. Not that they couldn't do this stuff. They've always been able to do it. But that was when we, as a community watching this stuff happen, that's when we would get triggered, to look for new stuff. But now I feel like it more than before, you're having to pay attention to the in-betweens to see the improvements also. And, the last version I got significantly better during the period I had it. I just got the most recent one on the car. So I'm going to take it out and drive it around some today and see if there's any material. But we keep getting these updates where like the notes don't change. Minor bug fixes. That's what it says, right? And yet it's getting better and better all through this stuff. It's not just minor bug fixes. The performance is improving. I mean, maybe they consider that a minor bug fix, right? If the performance isn't good enough, that's a bug. So anyway, so 13, I feel like it's living up to the hype. So, hey, Farzad, I mentioned Hans that last time I was on, both you and Hans, this is only 4 months ago, actually. You both seemed pretty skeptical, especially you, about the potential
Shots
for
fired.
unsupervised to actually happen. Well, because you asked me that question about, can they put a steering wheel in the CyberCab? It seems like they're going to need it. Right?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So my big thing was I didn't see, my confusion was, okay, it wasn't even necessarily like a capability thing. It was a regulatory thing. It's like, even if Tesla was to say, get to a point that by the time CyberCab goes into full production, let's say, what's the likelihood that the demand for unsupervised FSD without a steering wheel and pedal aligns with the supply of what Tesla can manufacture by, say, mid 26 or 27, which could be in the million plus units per year? And in my head, I'm like, even if the capability is there, it doesn't seem like the regulatory is going to catch up for them to be able to put those cars somewhere. But here's where it's getting interesting now, because I flip-flop on this thing like crazy. I'm like, who was that one flip-flopper politician from like years ago? They would call him Flip-Flop Jack or whatever. I forget what it was. So I'm flip-flopping on this all the time. Now I'm at the point where it's like, the improvements are so obvious, and FSD 13's performance is so, and I'll give you an example. We went to St. Petersburg a month or two ago. I forget when exactly. And I'm not familiar with the area. We rented a Model 3 with hardware for FSD 13.2.8 or whatever the version was at the time. And I keep getting these light bulb moments where I'm like, holy shit, even though I have Teslas with FSD, and I get to experience it every single day, it's a wholly different experience where you're on a road system that you're not familiar with at all, and the car just drives, and you don't have to worry about it. And that's when I'm like, oh, okay, all right, I get it now. So now I'm at the point where like, okay, so given that we have an administration in the United States that seems to be a lot more friendly to creating frameworks for self-driving, now that we have a company that's actually creating the technology that can drive itself in an unsupervised manner in a very short time, and they have the scale to actually drop millions of these per year in the next couple years or whatever, could that just be the forcing function for this technology to be adopted? And it's not so much can regulatory catch up? It's more like, well, Tesla's making them anyway. Why wouldn't you adopt it, right? So that's where I'm stuck now. I don't know if any of that made any sense, but it's like, now I'm at the point where if Tesla can do it, I feel like it's a no-brainer to just do it and just dump a bunch of unsupervised without steering wheel and pedal cars, and the market will just buy them up because there's just too much value there. The value proposition is too large. So I don't know.
I'm sort of expecting Tesla to keep those for an internal fleet in the beginning. I do believe it makes sense. I think that they can sell the CyberCab for people who want one. Can be their primary vehicle. They can put it on the fleet or not. It's a fine vehicle. It'll be inexpensive. It'll work for a huge chunk of a lot of people's things. So yeah, sure, sell it. But it really feels like a fleet vehicle. It feels like it's configured for that, right? The charging is more constrained than the charging that people will have at home, right? Because they're not putting the external port on it. In lots of ways, it doesn't look like it's targeted at retail sales. It looks like it's targeted at being a taxi for a fleet, and they'll spin it up sometime next year. They were talking about starting in summer 26, so that means they'd have like built 200 Ks by the end of cars by the end of 26, right? Because it takes a while to ramp. And this unbox process is it's probably more new than the Cybertruck was, and it took a while to get ramped, right? Lots of issues. So then maybe they do 1 million in 27, and 26, 27, 1.2 million Cybercabs plus X million. Maybe they get a few 100,000 or 1 million, people in the United States. The U.S. is the key market for Tesla for the robotaxi thing. It's the best market. It's the most profitable market. We use cars the most. You compare it to China, you compare it to Europe. People drive cars here more. They pay a lot more to drive cars, right? The margin's higher, and we pay way more for taxis than people pay in China, for instance, which is a huge market. But robotaxi, it's kind of hard to compete with what Chinese, rideshare drivers are willing to take. So the U.S., it's the most important market. And I think, the U.S. can absorb a couple million cars really easily, like more than Tesla can field probably by the end of 27, which is, like I said, I feel that, demand is totally not going to be a problem for this. To the extent that you would like to match demand and supply is going to be way behind the ball for as far as the eye can see, right? Because as the software gets better, there are more places that you can roll it out. By the end of 27, though, like if they can do unsupervised here in 25, by the end of 27, it's going to be really good, right? It's going to have 2 more years of gains on it. Maybe a new hardware platform. They still haven't rolled out AI5, right? So it might be rock solid by the end of 27. And then the demand is 25 million cars. And no matter what you do, I don't see, even at Tesla speed, I don't see them getting 25 million cars out there before 2030, right? It's just that's a lot of ramping, a lot of building to do that kind of stuff. So you got 3, 4, 5 years where demand is just massively outstripping the supply that you can in the most important market, the US market. And then, they're going to want to build factories to do this, one in China, one in Europe at least, or, you'll do it in Giga China, or maybe, I don't know if they have space. The unbox line is a completely different line than the other one. So you need a lot of factory space to do that.
Got it. Yeah. And so for the foreseeable future, the strategy that Tesla could employ, that if the assumption is correct that CyberCab is more Tesla internal fleet, and then everything else is sort of like customers can purchase, then it's like, okay, if you want steering wheel and pedal, buy the 3, buy the Y, buy the Cybertruck, buy the SNX, buy these more affordable vehicles. And then in the meantime, we're just going to keep ramping up our product line, which is going to be geared for 90% of trips, which is 2 people or less, for these, point A to point B, where in a day you're going to be doing less than 200 miles in a day. And we'll just populate whatever region we can get into with that solution. And it's going to be maximally tailored to be a fully autonomous vehicle with the wireless charging, without a steering wheel and pedal. And Tesla will just manage that rollout, right? And then maybe over time, if they get to a point where, I love to pick your brain on this too. It's like at some point, it feels like managing the fleet, the cleaning. I mean, unless they could do it autonomously with the bot. And I know they show it off like the cleaning robot that they're building. So they're clearly thinking about the fleet management portion of it. But I do wonder if at some point, the management of the fleet and keeping it clean and ensuring, it's maintained and everything becomes such a burden to Tesla that they open that up to other people to say, okay, so you can buy 1,000 Cybercabs, you can buy 10,000 Cybercabs, right? And then y'all can manage it, and then we'll just take a cut from the network, and that's how we'll sell you the car, and we'll take a cut from the network, and y'all can just operate, and you can keep the rest, right? And you can figure out how you want to, soup it up or not, and blah blah blah. So, that could just. That's an interesting thing to think through, though, because I mean that solves for the CyberCab not needing a steering wheel and pedal. You just tell them to just buy something else. Buy the 3, buy the Y, buy the more affordable vehicle. Yeah.
Yeah. It's, okay. I mean, the CyberCab, it won't. They certainly won't roll it out to retail customers until it can do that job. And in the meantime, there's lots of other. I mean, the low cost vehicles coming out soon too, right? So there's going to be yet another player in that space. CyberCab, it's really designed to be a cab. I can see there being people who want it. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a significant number of people that it's a good fit for, but that's not the meat and potatoes for that. It's a fleet vehicle.
That makes perfect sense.
Thing. But anyway,
Yeah.
I wanted to talk some about this thing I mentioned to Hans, which I think it got some attention. It didn't get enough attention. And I think it's the most interesting and significant sort of technical tidbit that we got out of Tesla in the last 4 months. And that is they rolled FSD out to China and it works, right?
Yeah.
And Tesla came right out and said, and Elon has suggested a couple of times, on top of this, they didn't train with data from China. Now, they had said prior to that they took China like YouTube video, like publicly available stuff, in order to basically tweak their driving simulator. So, they train with real data, but they also train with simulated data. So you can use the simulated data to fill in gaps, to do things that you can't get real world data on, to test out weird scenarios. Like they've got a driving simulator, and part of the data that they train on is scenarios so they basically took the data, tweaked their simulator to make a China version, right? And then they took the real world data in the US, in Europe. They probably got a decent amount of it from Europe, but they're not allowed to bring it from China. Like the Chinese government said, you can't do that.
James, how much data do you think they might have pulled in from other Asia Pacific countries besides China that have, maybe similar driving dynamics, whether that's Singapore, Hong Kong, Korea, Japan, these types of places?
Do any of those countries have similar driving dynamics? Like what I see of Singapore and China is they're very different, the road system. Like the Singapore and China are more different than the US and Europe. So anyway, they have a system. It works in China. It works well enough that at least all I see is, the Chinese equivalent of YouTube and the translations of that. So you got to take it all with a grain of salt. But in general, it seems like people are really happy with it, that it's getting evaluated as good or better than the homegrown Chinese versions of this stuff. And not just like YouTubers saying this, but, like people in the car business developing this stuff have made public statements to that effect too. So the thing that's significant about this is that is really hard to do. Like one of the things that was a really significant technical risk at the stage of Tesla's development of this technology is that if it were the case that you needed lots and lots and lots of real world miles from every single different place that you were going to deploy, like you can still deploy that. But if you can develop a base model that's just a really, really good driver, and then you can basically fine tune it with simulator data, which is generated for different that's a completely different level of effort that it takes to generalize. Not only does it shows that the core driver is much more flexible and much more reliable, and it's tunable, right? Like you can change its behavior significantly with a relatively small amount of tuning data that can be synthetic. Like one of the problems with using synthetic data, classically with these kinds of things, where you've got simulated data and you've got real data and you're trying to use a combination of them to train a thing, is that the neural networks, they're really good at figuring out the difference between the simulated stuff and the real stuff. Like it's hard to make the simulated data that's so good that the neural network like can't easily. It will figure out the difference between the two. And so what that means is that you've had to keep the mix like overwhelmingly real world data and then add little synthetic data just in the corner cases. Because if the synthetic part gets too big, then the system performance in the real world ends up degrading. Because, the simulated world and the real world, they're different in some significant ways. And if the system starts behaving more like it's in a simulator and less like it's in the real world, then the real world performs. Anyway, so this is a classic problem that's been for like all the sim to real issues are like this. And that's what this is. This is a sim to real for cars, right? But so you take mostly real world data, you put some synthetic data in. But the thing is, if you keep the amount of synthetic data small enough that it doesn't degrade the real world performance, can you make it big enough that you can tune to a whole new place that the car's never driven before? Like that was a really big technical question. And now we know the answer. And the answer is yes, you can do it. It totally works. Like it's proving itself. They had enough confidence that they put it in the hands of just regular customers in China, like a lot of them, and those customers are happy.